Have you ever wondered what happened to the Confederates after the American Civil War? This pivotal moment in American history marked the end of a brutal and devastating conflict that tested the nation's unity and resolve. As the Confederacy collapsed, its leaders, soldiers, and citizens faced an uncertain future. The consequences of their rebellion against the United States government were severe, leading to a series of events that shaped the course of American history. In this video, we'll embark on a journey to uncover the surprising and often controversial fate of the Confederates after the war. Stay tuned, as we'll also explore the lasting legacy of the Confederacy, including the ongoing debates and controversies surrounding its symbols, monuments, and ideology. Historical background. The American Civil War was a pivotal moment in U.S. history, and its causes can be viewed from several angles. At the heart of the conflict was the issue of slavery, which had long been a point of contention between the northern and southern states. The southern states relied heavily on slavery, while the northern states had abolished it, leading to deep divisions and tensions between the two regions. Economic differences also played a significant role in the lead-up to the war. The northern states were industrializing, while the southern states relied on agriculture, leading to disagreements over tariffs, trade, and economic policies. The southern states felt that the northern states were threatening their way of life and wanted more political power to protect their interests. They believed that the federal government was favoring the northern states and imposing policies that hurt their economy. Political power struggles added fuel to the fire, with the southern states feeling that their rights were being eroded by the northern states. The election of Abraham Lincoln, an anti-slavery candidate, as president in 1860, was seen as a threat by the southern states, leading several of them to secede from the Union. They believed that Lincoln's election would lead to the abolition of slavery, which they saw as a threat to their economy and way of life. The tensions between the northern and southern states had been building for decades, with several events contributing to the outbreak of war. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed new states to decide whether to allow slavery, led to pro-slavery and anti-slavery violence in Kansas. The Dred Scott had no right to sue in court, outraged many in the North. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, which aimed to spark a slave rebellion, was seen as a threat by the southern states. The tensions finally came to a head when Confederate forces fired on Union troops at Fort Sumter in April 1861, starting the Civil War. The war would last 4 years, claim the lives of over 600,000 soldiers, and lead to the abolition of slavery. The American Civil War. The war began when Confederate forces bombarded Fort Sumter in South Carolina in April 1861. Over the next 4 years, Union and Confederate forces clashed in over 10,000 battles across the country, from Vermont to Arizona. One of the first major battles was the First Bull Run, fought on July 21, 1861. Union General Irvin McDowell led his forces into Virginia, hoping to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond and end the war quickly. However, his men were mostly inexperienced volunteers who were not prepared for the brutal fighting that lay ahead. They were defeated by Confederate forces led by General Pierre G.T. Beauregard, with over 2,800 Union soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. The Confederates suffered nearly 2,000 casualties of their own. The Union Army achieved 2 significant victories in 1862. First, General Ulysses S. Grant captured Fort Donelson in Tennessee in February. The Confederates tried to escape, but Grant found a weak point in their line and attacked, forcing them to surrender. This victory opened up Tennessee to the Union invasion and made Grant a national hero. In September, General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia invaded Maryland, but was stopped by General George McClellan's Army of the Potomac at the Battle of Antietam. The battle was brutal, with over 22,000 casualties on both sides. Although it ended in a stalemate, the Union had prevented Lee's invasion, which gave President Abraham Lincoln the confidence to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, redefining the war as a fight against slavery. The battle's brutality was also brought home to Northerners through photographs displayed in New York. The Confederate Army, led by General Robert E. Lee, achieved a significant victory at Chancellorsville, Virginia, in May 1863. Lee's forces were outnumbered, but he used a clever tactic to outflank the Union Army, led by General Joseph Hooker. The Union troops were forced to retreat, with over 17,000 casualties. However, the victory came at a great cost, as Lee's trusted officer, General Thomas "Stonewall" Jackson, was accidentally shot by his own men and died a few days later. Meanwhile, in the Western Theater, General Ulysses S. Grant was determined to capture Vicksburg, Mississippi, a strategic fortress city on the Mississippi River. Grant's forces attacked the city several times, but the Confederate defenders held strong. Grant then settled into a long siege, bombarding the city with artillery and naval fire, and forcing the Confederates and civilians to endure hunger and illness. After several attempts, Grant finally forced Confederate General John C. Pemberton to surrender, giving the Union control of the entire Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy in two. Gettysburg, a turning point. The war had devastated Virginia, and General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia was in dire need of supplies. Lee's forces had been pursued by Union troops led by General George Meade, who finally caught up with them in Pennsylvania. The stage was set for one of the most pivotal battles in history, Gettysburg. The Confederates initially drove the Union troops back, but their momentum was halted on the second day. On July 3rd, Lee launched a bold attack on the Union center at Cemetery Ridge, but it ended in disaster. Pickett's charge, as it became known, resulted in a staggering 60% casualties for the Confederates. Lee was forced to retreat, abandoning his invasion of the North. The battle was a crushing defeat for the Confederacy, with devastating losses on both sides. The Union suffered 23,000 casualties, while the Confederates lost 28,000 men. The South's hopes for foreign recognition were dashed. Lee offered his resignation to President Jefferson Davis, but it was refused. The Battle of Gettysburg took on even greater significance in November 1863, when President Abraham Lincoln traveled to the site and delivered the Gettysburg Address. In his famous speech, Lincoln honored the sacrifice of the soldiers who died there and redefined the war as a struggle for the nation. Atlanta, the final blow. Near the end of the war, Union armies led by General William T. Sherman converged on Atlanta, where they were met with a desperate Confederate counterattack. The Battle of Atlanta was the bloodiest part of Sherman's march through Georgia, with the Union suffering 3,700 casualties and the Confederates losing 5,500 men. Sherman's forces continued their advance, surrounding the city and besieging it for the entire month of August. Finally, on September 1st, Confederate General John Bell Hood abandoned the city, allowing Sherman's forces to enter. The capture of Atlanta crippled the Confederate war effort. The victory provided a much-needed boost for President Lincoln, who was facing a difficult election in 1864. His victory helped him pursue the war to its conclusion. The fall of Atlanta marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. Northerners' surprising leniency. According to the U.S. Constitution, treason is defined as levying war against the government and aiding and abetting its enemies. By this definition, every Confederate soldier and political leader could be considered a traitor. Yet, despite this, no one was executed for treason, and Davis wasn't even tried for the crime. But how did the North reconcile hatred with leniency? Historian William A. Blair explores this paradox in his book, With Malice Toward Some, Treason and Loyalty in the Civil War Era. He delves into how the Northern states balanced their hatred for the rebels with a surprising record of leniency towards them. During the Civil War era, treason was a hot topic in public discussions, in pamphlets, newspapers, and public gatherings. It was as frequently discussed as the war's progress and the welfare of soldiers. Popular notions of treason, rather than court decisions, drove policymaking and sometimes led individuals to take matters into their own hands, like storming a newspaper office or punishing an outspoken minister. The lack of a government bureaucracy and the extreme threat to the nation created a sense of emergency, which sometimes led to extreme actions. There was no Department of Homeland Security, FBI, or any other federal agency to identify treasonous or disloyal acts. This power vacuum allowed for harsh measures to be taken against perceived traitors. During the Civil War, the lines between loyalty and treason were blurry. It was unclear who had the authority to make arrests, the federal, state, or local government, and what actions constituted disloyalty. Even the definition of treason was unclear. Obviously, spying, sabotage, and running guns were treasonous acts, but what about criticizing President Lincoln or selling food to people in rebel states? Was that considered giving aid and comfort to the enemy? The North struggled to address the issue of treason. A joint congressional committee investigated Union generals accused of being soft on rebels, while military commanders determined treasonous acts in other cases. Civilians could be arrested and imprisoned by military commissions for speaking out against the war or expressing sympathy for the South. In essence, speech, written or spoken, was a key factor in determining disloyalty in the minds of Unionists. President Lincoln himself identified a list of top Confederate generals, including iconic figures like Robert E. Lee and Joseph E. Johnston, who deserved imprisonment for treason in 1863. This highlights the complexity of the era, where even the president struggled to define the boundaries of loyalty and treason. During the Civil War, hundreds of citizens in the northern states were arrested for supposedly disloyal acts, like cheering for Jefferson Davis or helping Union Army deserters. Historian William A. Blair includes 3 detailed appendices in his book that show how these cases were handled. While many Northerners were passionate about prosecuting traitors, their passion didn't lead to harsh punishments. In fact, none of these cases ended with execution. Confederate soldiers of all ranks were generally paroled and faced no formal charges of treason. This lenient approach might seem surprising, but Northerners took a pragmatic view of the war's end. They realized it was impractical to try thousands of Southerners for disloyalty in states where juries were unlikely to deliver guilty verdicts. Moreover, continued cries of treason would interfere with the more important task of rebuilding the nation. Ironically, this lenient approach allowed Confederate leaders like Robert E. Lee to become heroic figures in later generations of Americans. As Union General George Thomas wrote in 1868, the crime of treason might be covered with a counterfeit varnish of patriotism so that the precipitators of the rebellion might go down in history hand in hand with the defenders of the U.S. government. This complex legacy continues to shape our understanding of the Civil War and its aftermath. Flights and exiles. After the American Civil War, many Confederate refugees fled their homes, seeking a new life in foreign lands. These displaced individuals formed Confederate colonies in various countries, with Brazil being the most popular destination due to its legal slavery and fertile land. Mexico and British Honduras, now Belize, also attracted smaller numbers of Confederate emigrants. The war had left many Southerners without land, and some were unwilling to live under the federal government. Economic prospects in the South looked bleak, and many hoped for a fresh start elsewhere. The majority of these emigrants hailed from states like Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, and Missouri. Brazil, with its vast territory and tolerant attitude towards slavery, became a haven for Confederate refugees. Between 1865 and 1885, approximately 20,000 Americans entered Brazil, according to port records in Rio de Janeiro. Other estimates suggest around 10,000 made the journey. Many adopted Brazilian citizenship, while some eventually returned to the United States after Reconstruction ended. In Mexico, Emperor Maximilian had actively encouraged foreign colonization, offering land grants and appropriations. However, after the French withdrew their support and Maximilian was defeated in 1867, these colonies ceased to exist. The victorious Mexican Republicans, who had fought against the imposed imperial government, did not recognize the land titles granted by Maximilian. The Confederate diaspora faced numerous challenges in their new homes. They had to adapt to unfamiliar cultures, languages, and environments. Many struggled to maintain their Southern identity and traditions in their new surroundings. Despite these difficulties, they managed to establish thriving communities and contribute to their adopted country's development. Confederate colonies in Brazil and Mexico were often organized according to their state of origin or military unit. For example, the Confederado colony in São Paulo, Brazil, was founded by refugees from Alabama, while the Villa Carlota colony in Veracruz, Mexico, was established by former soldiers from the Confederate Army. These colonies served as a support network for the displaced Southerners, allowing them to maintain their cultural heritage and sense of community in their new homes. They built churches, schools, and social clubs, and celebrated traditional Southern holidays like Christmas and the 4th of July. The colonies also became centers of agricultural innovation, as the Confederates introduced new crops and farming techniques to their adopted countries. The experience of the Confederate diaspora varied greatly depending on the individual's social status, skills, and adaptability. Some thrived in their new environments, while others struggled to make ends meet. Reconstruction and Redemption. The Reconstruction era, spanning from 1865 to 1877, was a transformative period in American history following the Civil War. It aimed to rebuild the South, ensure the rights of formerly enslaved individuals, and establish new state governments. The 13th Amendment, 1865, abolished slavery, and the 14th Amendment, 1868, granted citizenship to former slaves. The Freedmen's Bureau, established in 1865, provided aid, education, and legal assistance to freedmen. During Reconstruction, new state governments were established, with constitutions that granted equal rights to all citizens, regardless of race. These governments were led by a mix of carpetbaggers, Northerners who moved to the South, scalawags, Southerners who supported Reconstruction, and freedmen. Many African Americans held political offices, including seats in state legislatures and the U.S. Congress. Hiram Revels, a minister and educator, became the first African American to serve in the U.S. Senate, representing Mississippi. Reconstruction also saw significant advancements in education and social welfare. The Freedmen's Bureau established schools and colleges, providing education to thousands of freedmen. Howard University, founded in 1867, became a prominent institution for African American higher education. The Bureau also provided food, clothing, and medical care to those in need. Additionally, the Reconstruction era saw the establishment of new churches, community organizations, and social clubs, which played a vital role in the development of African American communities. The Reconstruction era was a time of great progress and achievement, marking a significant step towards equality and freedom for African Americans. The era's accomplishments laid the groundwork for future generations to continue the fight for social justice and human rights. The establishment of new state governments, education and social welfare programs, and the rise of African American political leadership all contributed to a more inclusive and equitable society. Redemption, 1877-1890s. The Redemption era followed the Reconstruction period, marked by a resurgence of white supremacist ideology and a concerted effort to undo the progress made during Reconstruction. White Democrats, who had previously opposed Reconstruction, sought to redeem their states from Republican rule and restore white dominance. During this era, white Democrats employed various tactics to regain control, including violence, intimidation, and electoral fraud. White paramilitary groups, such as the White League and Red Shirts, used violence and intimidation to suppress African American voting and political participation. Southern state legislatures passed laws restricting African American voting rights, limiting social and economic opportunities, and enforcing racial segregation. The Redemption era saw the rise of Jim Crow laws, which codified racial segregation and discrimination. These laws mandated separate and unequal facilities, services, and opportunities for African Americans, entrenching racial segregation and discrimination. The Supreme Court's decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896, legitimized segregation, cementing the Redemption era's legacy. Redemption marked a devastating reversal of Reconstruction's progress, disenfranchising African Americans and entrenching racial segregation. This era's impact continued to shape American society, perpetuating systemic racism and inequality. The Redemption era's legacy can still be seen today, with ongoing struggles for racial justice and equality. It serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for true freedom and equality in the United States. The legacy of the Civil War. The American Civil War, 1861-1865, was a pivotal moment in the country's history, leaving a lasting impact on its social, political, and economic landscape. The war's legacy continues to shape the United States today, with its effects evident in various aspects of American life. The most significant legacy of the Civil War is the abolition of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, and the 13th Amendment, 1865, freed millions of enslaved Africans, transforming the nation's social fabric. This monumental change paved the way for the civil rights movement and the ongoing struggle for racial equality. The war's aftermath saw the Reconstruction era, 1865-1877, during which the nation attempted to rebuild and redefine itself. The period saw the passage of landmark legislation, including the 14th and 15th Amendments, which granted citizenship and voting rights to former slaves. However, Reconstruction ultimately failed to achieve its goals, leaving a legacy of unfinished business in terms of racial justice and equality. The Civil War solidified the United States as a single, indivisible nation. The conflict resolved the question of states' rights and cemented federal authority, creating a stronger, more centralized government. This legacy has shaped America's national identity and informed its responses to subsequent challenges, including world wars and social movements. The war's legacy extends to the political and social spheres. The Civil War led to the rise of the Republican Party and the decline of the Whig Party, reshaping the political landscape. Additionally, the war spurred social movements, including women's suffrage and labor rights, as women and workers became more involved in the war effort. The Civil War had significant economic consequences, including the destruction of infrastructure, the loss of human capital, and the shift from an agrarian to an industrial economy. The war also led to the expansion of federal power, the creation of a national banking system, and the development of new technologies. The Civil War has had a profound cultural impact, influencing literature, art, music, and film. Works like Gone with the Wind, 1936, and Roots, 1976, have shaped public perceptions of the war and its legacy. The conflict has also inspired countless songs, poems, and artworks, cementing its place in American cultural heritage. The Civil War's legacy continues to be felt in contemporary America, from debates over Confederate monuments to discussions of systemic racism and inequality. Its impact is evident in the ongoing struggle for racial justice, the evolution of American democracy, and the nation's responses to global challenges. As we conclude our journey through the shocking fate of the Confederates after the American Civil War, we're reminded of the complexities that continue to shape our understanding of this pivotal moment in history. From the harsh realities of defeat and punishment to the ongoing debates surrounding the Confederacy's legacy, we've seen how the consequences of rebellion and war can be far-reaching and profound. Yet, we've also seen the power of redemption and forgiveness, as individuals and nations alike have sought to rebuild and move forward in the aftermath of conflict. As we reflect on the stories and events we've explored, we're reminded of the importance of understanding our shared history, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. Thank you for watching this video. Please drop your thoughts in the comments and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe.